He didn't walk in expecting applause. He wasn't looking for recognition, or validation, or even warmth. He just wanted to retrieve a file from the system he helped design, in the building he once poured his soul into. But something happens when the place you built forgets your name, when your own lobby looks through you, when a stranger half your age decides, with one glance, that you don't belong, and you feel it not as an explosion, but as a slow, silent erosion. A quiet undoing of everything you were told hard work would protect you from. He could have left. Most would have. But he didn't. He stayed. Not to prove a point, but to remind the room who built it. Now, let's get started. The morning air in Atlanta had that crisp edge that only shows up for a few weeks in fall brief, sharp, and gone before most people remember to notice it. Elijah Rowe stood on the granite steps of the Rowe Metrics headquarters, looking up at the building he once poured every sleepless night into. The mirrored glass facade reflected the rising sun, as if the place was still full of promise. He exhaled. No security badge today. No escort. No fancy title. Just khakis, a navy pullover, and the plain ID clipped to his back pocket, the one issued to internal contractors. The truth was, Elijah didn't need an appointment. He was still technically the CEO emeritus, but he hadn't walked through those front doors in 3 months. Not since his mother had gotten sick. Not since he'd stepped away, quietly, to be a son instead of a symbol. Now he was back. Not for press, not for speeches. Just to check something simple in the system. Pull a series of internal reports from the finance terminal on the 5th floor, something that could only be done in person. And yet, as he walked toward the front desk, a familiar doubt flickered in his chest. The lobby buzzed with soft conversation and quiet key taps. Designers crossed paths with coders. Project leads with their earbuds in nodded silently as they passed. The place hadn't changed. But the moment Elijah approached the desk, it felt like something had. The woman at reception, Hannah, looked up and blinked. She was new, maybe 6 weeks in. Blonde, late 20s, spotless blazer, the kind of smile trained by HR. But she didn't smile at him. Not really. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone more transactional than welcoming. Elijah nodded, kept his voice steady. "Elijah Rowe. I'm here to access the finance terminal. Should be pre-cleared under my name." Her fingers paused over the keyboard. "And you are?" she repeated, the corners of her mouth tightening as if she hadn't heard the name before. "Elijah Rowe," he repeated, slower now, as in Rowe Metrics. There was a flicker, something like surprise, but it vanished so fast he might have imagined it. She looked down at her monitor. "I'm not seeing that name in the contractor database," she said, already shaking her head. "You'll need an appointment to access any internal systems." Elijah tapped his ID gently against the counter. That should override the appointment requirement. But Hannah didn't touch it. She didn't even glance at the card. Instead, she gave him a tight-lipped smile and reached for the intercom. One moment. He watched her press the button, watched her mouth move behind the glass partition, watched her eyes flick toward the far corner of the lobby where security usually lingered out of sight. She wasn't looking for help. She was looking for backup. Elijah's shoulders stayed square. His breath stayed slow. But inside, the knot had already begun to form. He turned slightly, just in time to see a man in a gray vest and earpiece begin to walk over casual, but direct. Tobias Grady, head of security. "Elijah." Tobias greeted him, though the tone said something colder. "We've got a protocol issue here?" "No issue," Elijah said. "Just trying to access a terminal. I'm cleared. She hasn't scanned my badge." Tobias didn't ask to see it. He didn't ask questions. He glanced at Hannah, who gave a small shrug, the universal sign for, "I don't know who this is, but he's being difficult." That was all it took. "I'm going to have to ask you to wait outside," Tobias said, lowering his voice as if he were doing Elijah a favor. There were people passing now. Some paused. Some looked away. No one intervened. "I'd rather stay right here," Elijah replied, calm and deliberate, "until someone from executive verifies my access." Tobias's jaw flexed. The friendliness dropped entirely. "You need to leave the premises, Mr. Rowe. Now." Elijah looked past him, toward the back elevators, the same ones he used to take daily when this company was just an idea on a whiteboard. He looked around at the lobby he designed, the marble tiles he handpicked with his co-founder. The irony tasted like rust in his mouth. Then he looked back at Tobias. "I built this place. But that didn't matter. Not today. Not here. Not when the wrong clothes and the wrong tone of skin spoke louder than any resume." Tobias stepped forward. The pressure was subtly hand on the shoulder, a gentle but firm motion that said this wasn't a conversation anymore. "Don't make this harder," Tobias muttered under his breath. As Elijah turned, escorted back through the glass doors, his reflection followed him like a stranger. Behind him, he heard Hannah speak again. Light, polite, already addressing the next visitor in line. Just another day. Just another misunderstanding. Except it wasn't. Outside, the breeze hit sharper than before. Elijah stood still for a moment at the edge of the plaza. No one followed. No one apologized. And then came the final insult. Tobias opened the door just long enough to toss something down on the granite steps. Elijah's employee badge. It landed face down. He crouched to pick it up, fingers closing around the plastic edge. That's when a shadow passed behind him. He didn't need to look to know who it was. The badge felt heavier in his palm than it had ever been clipped to his belt. Elijah stared at it for a moment face down. A smudge on the photo. The company logo dulled by years of handling. It used to mean something. Now it lay there like evidence from a life he was being asked to deny. He stood slowly, drawing in a breath through his nose, letting the morning air steady his thoughts. People passed by. No one asked questions. They moved the way people do when discomfort is nearby, fast, forward, eyes averted, pretending not to see, pretending not to care. A rustle beside him, a voice low and worn. "They always do this." Elijah turned his head slightly. Terrell Hawkins stood there, in full security uniform, sleeves rolled up to the elbows. He wasn't part of the show inside. No headset, no urgency, just presence. Familiar, steady. He bent down, picked up the badge gently, brushed it off with the sleeve of his jacket, and held it out. Elijah took it without a word. Their fingers brushed barely. Terrell's face was lined with fatigue, but it wasn't the kind that came from working late. It was the kind that grew year by year, cut by cut, quiet erosion. A lifetime of being polite just long enough not to become a problem. He looked toward the glass doors, where Tobias now stood sentry again, posture square, back turned to them like nothing had happened. Terrell shook his head. "Doesn't matter what your resume says," he muttered. "Doesn't matter how many buildings you build. If you're not wearing the right kind of suit or the right shade of skin, you're invisible." Elijah didn't reply. He didn't need to. The silence between them was full. Terrell took a breath, let it sit, then offered the only truth that mattered. "I saw you. Back when this place was just 6 floors and a dream. I knew who you were." Then he walked off, disappearing into the slow stream of morning foot traffic. Just like that. Elijah stayed still. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. A calendar reminder. He ignored it. The badge was warm in his hand now, and he couldn't stop replaying it. Hannah's dismissiveness, Tobias's hand on his shoulder, that feeling not just of being unwanted but of being erased. He had once told his team in a pitch meeting, "We're building a company that sees people," and now they didn't even look twice. He turned slowly, walked to the bench across the courtyard, sat down, pulled out his phone. He hesitated. Who do you call when you've just been pushed out of your own home? His thumb hovered over one name. Cliff Taylor. They hadn't spoken in weeks. Cliff was a senior partner now, moved to Boston, oversaw venture portfolios. He wasn't involved in day-to-day operations anymore. But he still had weight. He still had reach. More importantly, Cliff knew Elijah, not the PR version, the real one. The Elijah who skipped meals to make payroll. The Elijah who once slept under his desk during the Series A chaos. The Elijah who refused to cut community scholarships even when the board called it non-essential. He tapped the name. It rang once, twice. Then, Ro? Cliff's voice was clear, sharp, a little surprised. Elijah didn't explain. Didn't need to. "I'm outside," he said quietly. "They threw me out." A long pause, then a breath. "Where?" "Lobby. Atlanta HQ. I'll be there in 15. The line went dead. Elijah tucked the phone away and leaned back, letting his shoulders press into the cold metal of the bench. The city buzzed around him, horns, heels on pavement, voices in every direction. But his world had narrowed to a 5-foot radius, a bubble of humiliation, thick and suffocating. Time dragged. Each minute stretched like rope, fraying. People came and went through the lobby doors. Not one of them looked at him twice. A few glanced, confused by his presence. A man in business casual, sitting on a bench, not begging, not talking, just existing. That alone made him suspicious. Across the courtyard, an elderly woman paused. She clutched her purse tighter, then hurried on. Behind the glass doors, he could still see Hannah, laughing with another employee now, as if he hadn't been a blip on her radar, as if she hadn't nearly had him dragged out like a trespasser. He closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of it pressed down like bricks. This wasn't new. It just never stopped hurting. He remembered his first rejection letter. Stanford GSB. They didn't even spell his name right. He remembered the first time a landlord refused to rent him a space, even with perfect credit. The first time a cab passed him for someone behind. 1,000 cuts. And somehow, every time it happened again, it still surprised him, still felt like a betrayal. Not just by the world, but by the idea that maybe, just maybe, things had changed. They hadn't. He opened his eyes. A young man stood across from him, maybe 22, hoodie half-zipped, AirPods in. The kid looked like he wanted to say something. Maybe he recognized him. Maybe he'd seen the company's founding story online. But like everyone else, he said nothing, just nodded once and walked away. Another missed moment. Another almost... Elijah sighed. He was so damn tired of being almost 12 minutes. Then, like clockwork, a black Audi pulled up to the curb. Sleek, quiet, efficient. Cliff stepped out. Still sharp as evergray wool overcoat, cuffed trousers, white shirt open at the collar. No tie, just presence. His eyes locked on Elijah immediately. His pace didn't break. No greetings, no handshakes. Just, "You ready?" Elijah stood. "Yeah." They walked together across the plaza. As they reached the doors, Cliff didn't hesitate. He didn't ask permission, didn't flash a badge, just pushed the glass open like he owned it. Tobias turned, startled. Eyes widened for a split second. "Sir, can I help you?" Cliff didn't stop walking. "I'm looking for whoever just decided to throw Elijah Rowe out of his own building," he said, voice calm but ringing through the lobby like a fire bell. Heads turned. Tobias blinked. Hannah stood frozen behind the desk. Her smile evaporated. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded, tense. Every breath in the room held its air. Elijah stepped in behind Cliff. Slow, deliberate. The weight of silence was still there. But this time, it was shifting. And they weren't alone anymore. The sound of Cliff's voice echoed off the polished concrete and glass like the crack of a gavel. "I'm looking for whoever just decided to throw Elijah Rowe out of his own building." Silence collapsed into chaos, or rather, the kind of chaos that comes with trying to act normal in the face of something that's clearly not. Chairs creaked. Keyboards clacked too quickly. Heads turned and then turned away. Behind the desk, Hannah's hands dropped from the keyboard like they'd forgotten what keys were. She blinked rapidly, searching for a script that didn't exist. Tobias took a slow step forward, his security badge now feeling more like a paper prop. "Mr. Taylor," he began, tone faltering. There was just a misunderstanding, sir. A protocol issue." Cliff didn't stop moving. He walked right past Tobias, his coat flaring slightly as he turned toward the main hallway. "A protocol issue," he repeated dryly. "Right. You mean the part where you threw a man out of his own company without checking who he was?" Tobias opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Cliff turned, sharp and direct, like a man accustomed to boardrooms where hesitation equaled weakness. "Where's Carlton?" Tobias blinked. "Mr. Carlton is in a budget alignment meeting." Cliff didn't wait for an invitation. He turned to Elijah, who had remained just a step behind him, quiet but upright, composed like a man used to swallowing fire and calling it steam. "You good to come with me?" Cliff asked. Elijah nodded once. "Let's end this." They walked down the hall, heels tapping against tile like slow thunder. Each step peeled back layers of shame Elijah didn't even know he was still carrying. He could feel the walls remember him, the glass offices he helped design, the potted plants he once joked made the company look too soft for investors. At the far end, the double doors to the executive boardroom stood open. Cliff walked in like he was on the docket. Elijah followed. Inside, 6 people sat around a long, matte black table, laptops open, coffee half drunk. Carlton stood at the head-tall pressed suit, pocket square, tucked like a Harvard flag. He looked up, eyes narrowing as Cliff entered. "Cliff," Carlton said, a smile too polished. "Didn't expect to see you today. What brings you?" Cliff raised a hand. "Save it. I'm not here for you." Then he stepped aside. Elijah stepped forward. Carlton's face froze, dead silent. You could hear a USB drive click into a port at the far end of the table. "I believe you've met Elijah Rowe," Cliff said, his voice deceptively calm. "Founder. CEO Emeritus. Your boss, technically. The one whose name is on every third brick of this building." Carlton stammered. Thought Elijah was on sabbatical." Elijah's voice was calm, but carried weight. "I was. Now I'm here. And I was denied access, publicly humiliated, and removed by force from the lobby of a company I started with nothing but a spreadsheet and faith." One of the women at the Tabla Senior Product lead shifted in her seat. You could see it in her eyes. She had heard. She had watched. She had said nothing. Carlton straightened his tie. There must have been a miscommunication. "No," Cliff said flatly. "There was no miscommunication. There was profiling. There was ignorance. There was a failure of leadership. And it starts with you." Carlton's expression finally cracked. "With all due respect, Cliff, this was a front desk mistake, not an executive one." Cliff chuckled once. "Oh, you're gonna wish it stayed at the front desk." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folder. He slapped it down onto the table in front of Carlton. 3 months of client complaints. Quiet ones. About who gets access to meeting rooms, who gets stopped in the parking garage, who gets random badge checks during after-hours access. There's a pattern, and this morning, that was your headline. Carlton glanced at the folder but didn't open it. His eyes were on Elijah now, calculating. "You didn't come back just for this," Carlton said, trying to reclaim ground. "You came to make a scene." Elijah stepped closer, his presence quiet but undeniable. "I didn't come to make a scene," he said. "I came to pull 3 internal ledgers. That was it. But what I found was rot. And now we're here." One of the men at the table finally spoke. "What are you asking for?" "Elijah." Elijah's eyes didn't leave Carlton's. "I want a full audit of hiring and promotion practices. I want every employee required to undergo bias training, including executive staff. I want Carlton suspended pending review. And I want full public acknowledgement of what happened in that lobby. My name, my face. Not an unfortunate incident, Not some PR-crafted nothing. The room froze. Carlton stepped back, lips parted, still trying to summon authority. You can't just walk in here and make demands like this. Cliff laughed quietly. Actually, he can. Then he turned to the others seated around the table. Unless someone here would like to explain why you thought it was appropriate to remove the founder of this company from his own lobby without so much as checking a name? No one spoke. The silence was deafening. And in it, Elijah saw something flicker uncertainty. Not just in Carlton, but in every person in the room who'd silently accepted things as they were. He turned back to Cliff. Can you bring in HR? Cliff nodded, already waiting outside. Elijah exhaled. Then let's begin. Back in the lobby, Hannah sat stiffly behind the desk. Her fingers were folded too neatly in front of her, her back straight as a rod. Tobias stood beside her, arms crossed, trying to look unbothered. The elevator dinged. Elijah stepped out. Behind him, Cliff and 2 HR directors. He didn't stop at the desk. He simply paused beside Hannah. You didn't even look at the badge, Elijah said quietly. She blinked, her eyes glassy. I thought, you thought I was a contractor, he finished for her. That I didn't belong. You decided before you asked. I didn't mean to. He didn't let her finish. Meaning isn't everything. He turned to Tobias. You followed her lead. You never asked. You never verified. You just pushed me out. Tobias's jaw tensed, but he didn't argue. I'm putting this on record, Elijah continued, glancing at the HR rep behind him. But I'm also asking for something more. I want a public-facing letter of apology, authored by Carlton, approved by me, issued by this company. Cliff raised a brow, then nodded. Done. Tobias spoke up. You're not firing us? Elijah turned. No. Then after a beat. But you'll earn your place back. The hard way. He looked past them to the far corner of the room where Terrell stood. Still on post. Still quiet. Eyes watching everything. Not everyone stood back. Elijah walked toward him. You picked up my badge. Terrell nodded once. Didn't seem right. It wasn't. You didn't need me to pick it up. No, Elijah said. But it mattered that you did. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. Congratulations, he said. Effective immediately. You're head of site security. Clean it up. Hire from the neighborhood. Bring in people who see first, act second. Terrell's mouth opened, stunned. Sir, Elijah smiled just slightly. Time to build again. The weight in the room shifted. Not dramatically, not loud, but undeniable. Like something invisible had finally cracked open just wide enough for light to pour through. By Thursday, the story had reached the corners of the building that usually ignored anything without a memo attached to it. People whispered no in the elevators, in the snack room, in Slack threads buried under company emojis. But no one said Elijah's name aloud. Not yet. It wasn't fear that kept them quiet. It was something else. Shame. And respect. The man who'd been erased at the door hadn't fired anyone, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't taken over meetings like a savior on a redemption arc. Instead, he'd walked back in with the stillness of someone who had nothing left to prove. He wasn't there to burn anything down. He was there to rebuild it better. Elijah declined the corner office. Said it never fit him right, anyway. He moved into a modest glass-walled room near HR right, where the interns passed through every morning with wide eyes and nervous hands. He called it visibility with a purpose. No press releases, no all-staff email, just presence. And people noticed, especially Carlton, who was placed on leave pending a third-party audit. He didn't fight it. Maybe he knew better. Maybe the look in Cliff's eyes had told him what would happen if he did. The HR team began sending out invitations for mandatory bias training, one department at a time. Unlike most companies where training was a checkbox, Elijah restructured it. He brought in social workers from the local community, educators, historians, and even a few employees who had volunteered to share their own lived experiences anonymously if they chose. And then there was Terrell, the new director of site security. He hadn't worn his new title like armor. He wore it like it didn't belong to him, yet like a borrowed coat he was still growing into. But his eyes were clearer now, and every decision he made, every guard he rehired, every shift he recalibrated, it all pointed back to something Elijah had said quietly during their first one-on-one. Your leadership won't come from authority. It'll come from restraint. Terrell had nodded. That I can do. At the same time, Elijah also began meeting with a small, cross-departmental team diverse in age, role, and background tasked with rewriting company onboarding, access protocols, and grievance procedures. The team called themselves Row Roots. He didn't ask them to. They just did. And when he saw the sticky note someone had taped on the conference room window, "Belonging starts at the door," he didn't remove it. He underlined it in green. On a chilly Monday morning, Elijah sat with a cup of black coffee at the edge of the building's rooftop terrace. It overlooked the heart of Atlanta where cranes hovered above old brick factories, and the skyline always seemed like it was in mid-sentence. He used to come here when he was building the company. Back then, the view made him feel powerful. Now, it made him feel small in the best way possible. Cliff stepped out beside him. "Morning," he said, hands stuffed in his coat pockets. Elijah nodded. "You ever think it would come to this?" Cliff chuckled. "You mean the founder almost getting tackled in the lobby?" "Yeah," Elijah said. "That part." Cliff shrugged. "It was always going to come to something. This company got too big, too fast. Somewhere along the way, it forgot where it started. That happens when your logo starts showing up in airport lounges." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Elijah asked, "You regret backing me?" Cliff's voice dropped. "Never. You built something real, even if people tried to hollow it out." Elijah took a sip of his coffee. "I'm not here to fix every system," he said quietly. "But if I can repair the door I was thrown out of, maybe someone else won't have to." Cliff nodded. "You will." Downstairs, in the training center, Hannah sat across from a facilitator in the second of 4 scheduled sessions. She hadn't cried. Not once. But she hadn't slept much either. The first time Elijah walked past her since the incident, he'd said nothing. Just a calm nod. And somehow, that felt heavier than any confrontation. During her session, she shared something she hadn't told anyone yet. "I wasn't afraid of him," she said, voice low. "I just didn't expect someone like that to be someone important." The room stayed quiet. No one judged. No one excused it either. The facilitator simply asked, "Why not?" That question stayed with her longer than she expected. By month's end, small changes had become permanent ones. Security desk policies were rewritten and published on the company's internal wiki. Every new hire received a manual that included a 1-page essay by Elijah. What it means to be seen. It wasn't poetic. It was simple, practical, true. He described how being ignored isn't always loud but always leaves a scar, and how healing begins when even one person dares to ask, "What am I not seeing?" That page was read aloud at the start of every new hire orientation. A new kind of anthem. Terrell, for his part, began organizing monthly coffee chats with local community watch members and former employees who'd quietly left the company over the years. He called it the Welcome Back Table. At first, HR was skeptical, but Elijah backed it. "It's not about PR," he said. "It's about accountability with chairs." By the 3rd month, those meetings were full. One afternoon, as Elijah walked the hall's no security badge, Noah Scorth passed a junior developer in her first week on the job. She stopped him. "Mr. Rowe?" He turned, surprised. "Yes?" "I just wanted to say, I read your page in orientation. It made me feel like this place was different." He paused. "Is it?" She smiled. "It's trying. That counts." He nodded slowly, then said, "Keep reminding it." She laughed. "I plan to." That night, Elijah sat at his desk long after most lights had dimmed. He stared at a photo taped to the bottom corner of his monitor. His mother, on the porch, laughing. It reminded him of the first time he told her he wanted to start his own company. She hadn't asked him for a business plan. She'd only said, "Just don't forget your door better open for everybody, not just you." He hadn't understood that wisdom then. Now, it rang like scripture. He reached for a pen and wrote a single line on the back of a sticky note. Legacy isn't what you build. It's who you hold the door open for. He stuck it under the screen, then shut off the light. No speech, no applause. Just quiet and purpose. 6 months later, the walls didn't look the same. That wasn't a metaphor. Literally, Rometrics headquarters in Atlanta had undergone what HR jokingly called a quiet revolution. New paint, softer lighting, open space where tinted glass once separated leadership from interns. The company had grown up, not by expanding, but by learning to breathe. On the first floor, past the security desk that now greeted every visitor with a human smile instead of a checklist, was a door that hadn't existed before. It was wide, always open, and above it, in brushed steel letters, were 5 words. The Elijah Rowe Listening Room. No fanfare had announced it, no red ribbon, no press release. It had simply appeared. Inside was a space like no other in the building. No desks, no keyboards, no talking unless invited. A warm oak circle of chairs surrounded a soft glow floor lamp. A bookshelf on one side held journals filled with anonymous reflections from employees, handwritten, unfiltered. You could read, or write, or just sit. Twice a week, Terrell would join quietly after his shift and read pages aloud, his voice steady, reverent, almost pastoral. Nobody clapped. That wasn't the point. It was the company's heart, rebuilt. Elijah hadn't asked for the room. In fact, he tried to turn it down. "It's not about me," he told Cliff. Cliff had smiled, weary and knowing. That's exactly why it needs to be. The first time Elijah stepped inside the space alone, it was evening. Most of the office had cleared out. A light Atlanta rain tapped against the windows like fingers reminding him to slow down. He sat down in one of the chairs, unsure what to feel. Across from him, on the opposite wall, was a framed photo. Black and white, grainy, candid. It was the security camera still from the day he'd been pushed out. Tobias had captured it before he left the company. A parting gift. In the image, Elijah stands on the front steps, posture straight, badge in hand. The world closing around him, but his dignity intact. And beneath the frame, a small plaque. You don't have to raise your voice to change the room. You just have to refuse to leave it. He hadn't written that. Someone else did. He just sat there for a long time, not as a founder, not even as a leader, but as a man being held by something bigger than himself. Memory. Witness. Change. Outside that room, the culture had shifted not perfectly, but undeniably. Meetings began with acknowledgments of lived experience. Leaders paused before speaking, not out of fear, but out of new reflex. And employees, who had once stayed silent during injustices, spoke, not in outrage, in clarity. Hannah, now part of the community engagement team, began holding first-glance workshops with new hires, helping them examine unconscious assumptions. Her first presentation had started with a slide titled, "What I Didn't See Until I Was the One Being Watched." She never apologized in public. Elijah had never asked her to. But her work? That was louder than any apology could be. On a stormy Friday afternoon, Rometrics hosted a panel open to the public titled "The Architecture of Belonging." Elijah had been asked to close it out. He didn't prepare a speech. He stood at the podium, hands resting lightly on the edges, and looked out at the room. Faces he didn't know, some from other cities, some from down the street, all listening. He took a breath. I don't know what to say to a room full of people who already understand, he began. But I do know what to say to the ones who might still be listening later. He paused. There will be a day maybe sooner than you expect when someone will walk into your building, your office, your space, and everything in your body will want to make a snap judgment. More silence. And that moment, right there, that's where culture begins. Not in a slogan, not in a training, but in whether or not you lean in. He looked down for a moment. When they pushed me out, I didn't know if I'd come back. Not because I wasn't allowed to, but because I wasn't sure the building deserved it. He looked back up. But then someone picked up my badge. A few in the audience turned their heads. Terrell was seated in the back row, chin tucked, eyes fixed forward. That moment didn't fix the day, Elijah said, but it told me someone had noticed. And if one person sees you, that's enough to survive. That's enough to begin. He didn't say more. He stepped down. The room didn't erupt in applause. It didn't need to. People stood not as ovation but as witness. Weeks later, a young man named Isaiah took a wrong elevator and ended up on the 5th floor, near Elijah's temporary office. He wore jeans and a backpack. First-generation college student, new hire. Orientation badge still clipped awkwardly to his hoodie. Elijah saw him through the glass wall. Lost? He asked, stepping into the hallway. Isaiah nodded. I was trying to find the design lab. Elijah smiled. Wrong floor. But not a bad mistake. He walked him toward the elevator. Isaiah glanced at him. You're Elijah Rowe, right? I am. Isaiah paused. Your story. It made me apply here. Elijah turned, brow lifted. The app said nothing about the founder getting kicked out of the lobby. Isaiah laughed. Not that part. The part where you didn't leave. That stopped Elijah. Isaiah continued. I've walked out of a few rooms before. Sometimes that felt safer, but I think I'm done doing that now. They reached the elevator. Elijah didn't speak right away. Then he said quietly, Good. The doors opened. Isaiah stepped in. Before they closed, Elijah added, If the lab doesn't feel like it fits, you let me know. Sometimes we need to rebuild the room, not the person in it. Isaiah nodded. The elevator closed, and Elijah stood there a moment longer, listening to the silence. There's a story that gets told around the company now unofficially. It isn't in any handbook. It's not even on Slack. It gets passed during mentorship chats, whispered over lunch, left scribbled on sticky notes at people's desks. Elijah built a room. They tried to lock him out of it, so he built a new door. That's how they say it. No drama, no fire, just architecture, just belonging. And on the wall outside the listening room, someone no one knows who once taped a piece of paper that read, Legacy is not the name on the building. It's who gets to stay inside when no one is watching. They never removed it. They just framed it and left the glass open. Sometimes, it's not the titles we hold or the walls we've built that define us. It's what we do when we're told we don't belong in the very space we created. Elijah didn't raise his voice. He didn't tear anything down. He simply stood and stayed. And that presence alone was powerful enough to change an entire system. So if you've ever been dismissed, doubted, or quietly pushed aside, let this be a reminder. Your dignity doesn't need permission to exist. You don't have to fight loudly to stand firmly in who you are. If this story moved you, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear how this story resonates with your own journey. Because sometimes, healing begins with being seen. You don't have to raise your voice to change the room. You just have to refuse to leave it. We'll see you in the next story. Stay tuned.